what I find is that in everything in life, if you have a passion to learn and you really want to take the journey, then that's what it's all about.
We give a very warm welcome to Jay Buchsbaum. Jay, how are you?
Nice to see you today. Thank you for inviting me here.
Same here. What a treat. What a pleasure. Tell us about yourself. You've been in the wine business for a nice long time.
It's been a long journey.
You look younger than
well, thank you.
than the amount of experience you have. But tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I grew up in Williamsburg,
Okay.
Brooklyn, not Virginia, and I lived in the projects. So I thought we were middle class or upper middle class, but in fact, in retrospect, I guess we'd be considered much less than that. But
you're on radio.
I remember one day coming out of our apartment on 121 Wilson Street and seeing a little sign that said "Hiring now," and this was during the fiscal crisis that New York City was going through, and they were firing everybody but hiring accountants. I was finishing college. I hadn't finished yet, but I had a major in accounting, so I took the job. And what was interesting about it is that I hated it, because I guess you could say maybe it's a little bit of my ADD or just, some of the bureaucracy that I just could not deal with. And after about a year, with almost 2.5 years actually, with plenty of all kinds of benefits and whatever, I finally took a job with a small wine company on the Lower East Side. Doesn't exist anymore, and the rest is history. Yeah. They told me when they interviewed me, they said, "But you understand, you don't have any of these benefits, and it's about half the pay." And I said, "Okay, why would I take this job?" And they said, "Well, it's also going to mean that you're going to have to do a lot of traveling." And I said to them, "Travel? Well, who's going to pay for that?" And they said, "Oh, we pay for all of that." And I said, "You got me. It's like you had me at hello." So, and the rest is history.
Talk about your love of wine. At what age did that? Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So the first time I tasted cream white Concord, which is quite sweet, I almost spit it out because I thought it was sour and dry, and because it wasn't quite as sweet as my extra heavy Malaga,
Okay.
But what I find is that in everything in life, if you have a passion to learn and you really want to take the journey, then that's what it's all about. And over time, going from one job to another for a few years, I've been with Royal Wine now for 31.
Wow.
Thank God. I just tasted wine, taste more, and just as you taste, recognize what you're doing. And if you have a little bit of direction from somebody more professional than you, and they can tell you how to direct you, you're good to go.
Now let's talk about the world of kosher wines.
Okay.
I believe we could discuss the elephant in the room. There's a misconception about kosher wines versus wines in general. What is it and why is it false?
Well, people think that kosher wines, if you go into a crowded room, and I do this all the time, and especially amongst both Jews and non-Jews, but that are not observant, and you ask them what makes wine kosher, and hands go up and they go, "Oh, it's blessed by the rabbi," right? And the answer is no, it's not blessed by the rabbi. In fact, the opposite. The objective of kosher wine is to keep blessings out of it. And it's you, the consumer, who buys it and consumes it, that adds the spirituality or the fun or whatever you want to use it for to the wine and to the use of the wine. And the only difference between kosher wine and non-kosher wine, unlike kosher food and non-kosher food, which is ingredients-based, is the fact that from the crushing of the grape until the bottle is sealed, it is overseen by a rabbinical authority and handled by a rabbinical authority.
So, but otherwise, to get to the crux of the issue, in terms of taste, is there any perceived difference?
There should be no perceived difference. If there is a difference, it's we've either done better than its non-kosher counterpart,
Jay says it straight,
or we've done worse. So
just in the development, like that could happen with any winery.
Yeah. I mean, for example, there's no difference between Coca-Cola that has the OU and before it had the OU. It's just a matter of making sure that, in the case of Coca-Cola, that the ingredients are correct. In the case of wine, that from the crushing of the grape until the bottle is sealed, it is all handled by an observant Jewish crew.
Let's continue on the subject. You touched on it. You more than touched on it, but about pairing food and wine. Let's say a dairy meal. You're going out. Does that mean that it's off limits?
So not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. On the contrary. And it's very interesting. I'm glad you asked that question because a lot of people are stuck on the idea that red wine goes with meat and white wine goes with fish. And if you're having, for example, a fish meal, there's actually a wide range of wines that can go with fish, not only white. So, for example, if you're having something, a white fish of some kind, let's say a sole, and you're having it in a sauce blanche, which is a very light sauce, you'd have something like a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, like Goose Bay Sauvignon Blanc, or Chenin Blanc, even if it's got a little bit of lemon and
Nice.
and sweet sauce to it. So you might have something like a Chenin Blanc from Baron Herzog. But if you're having, for example, a fish dish that is in red, rich Italian sauce with olives and capers and all kinds of thick, red, flavorful, then even though it's a fish, it really deserves a red wine. And I would suggest maybe not a Cabernet or a heavy Cabernet, but certainly a Merlot, like a Shore Merlot from Shiloh, or Baron Herzog's Merlot from California. So it depends. Again, let's go back to the idea that the fish or the food has to match with the wine. So if you're going to have this red, rich fish dish, you're not going to have a light white wine because the food will overpower the wine. Now, on the other hand, there are some very rich white wines. As an example, Russian River Chardonnay from Herzog, or Castel C Blanc, which is a Chardonnay that comes from the Judean Hills, which was just written up and got a 90 in the Spectator.
Nice.
And so on. So the answer is, there is a rule of thumb, generally speaking.
Okay.
Dairy and fish meals are lighter, so therefore they deserve lighter wines. So therefore, white wines usually fit the bill. But that rule of thumb is meant to be broken if the food calls for it.
My guest this evening is none other than Jay Buchsbaum, Executive Vice President of Marketing at Royal Wine Corporation. Now, Jay, you've traveled the world many times over. If I may put you on the spot, what's the wildest either question or circumstance of food pairing that you've encountered, if I may?
Well, you're really putting me on the spot here. It's not rehearsed, so I really am on the spot.
Okay, so I can move along, but I mean, needless to say, you've had probably a dozen of them. You probably just have to pick the best one.
I think that probably the nicest food and wine pairing experience I ever had on the road was when I was in Israel. I was at the Flam Winery, and they hired a private chef with a 6-course meal. And here's where people should learn something.
Beautiful.
Instead of, people immediately, especially if they're having good wine, will fill their glass, all right? But if you're having a 5-course meal, even if it's at home, don't necessarily fill your glass. Have 5 different wines. And if you can't finish each bottle, invite more people, for goodness sakes. And, because it's no fun to have that full glass of the first 2, let's say. After that, you can't think anymore. You won't appreciate it anymore. So instead of having, and that's what they did. That's why it was a great experience, and it was a learning. I mean, I used to do that anyway, but it was even more of a learning experience coming from a winemaker who understood that. And when they poured the wine, they understood that. And they poured only, an ounce and a half or 2.5 to 2.5 ounces. That's it. And then by the time you had your 5 courses, you had a total of between 10 and 15 ounces, which is fine. Maybe 18 ounces, which is fine for the evening over a 2 or 3 hour period of having dinner. So
this past week, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal. How much is too much to spend on wine? Right?
Yeah,
right here, Wall Street Journal.
So, and she's great, Letty.
Yeah, so
Letty
maybe
T.
you could, I would love to have your perspective. I mean, the great coincidence, if you will, that we're on the radio this week. Maybe you could provide comments.
She actually interviewed me 2 years ago before Passover. We had dinner at a really wonderful little restaurant called Reserve Cut down in Wall Street area. And she was wonderful, but she's really on target. The answer very simply is there is no price, meaning it can be $6, or it could be $600. And what you're really looking for is the appropriate wine. And it's okay if it's $6, and it's okay under really rare and wonderful circumstances if it's $600, but understand that it's got to be the right wine at the right value, something that you wrote about in your own book, QPR.
Thank you.
Quality price ratio. And that's really what the key is. It's got to match the food you're going with. And I would say that for direction, if you don't know yourself, if you're not like the expert and really know what you're doing, I would say that go to a store that has the consumer. It's not just a big box store where, you just pick up your wine, but that has a wine consultant on the floor. And they can guide you to the best values and, more importantly, to the most appropriate wine, regardless of price.
Now, Jay, are there certain qualifications, and permit me to ask you this on the air, I hope it's not a sensitive question, certain qualifications that has to make the cut for Royal Wine Corporation to include it in its portfolio?
It's a great question. Nathan Herzog, to his great credit, I'm thinking about 5, 6, maybe even 7 or 8 years ago, it used to be that Jay would come with a bottle of wine and he would say, guys, we have to have this wine. It's delicious. And a couple of the Herzogs would taste it and they would say, yeah, let's do it, Or Nathan or Matti or David Herzog, Shmuley would come and say, I tasted this wine in Israel, called him immediately, we got to bring it in, and we would. And then what would happen is that the salespeople and the management, and this is a very important thing from a marketing point of view, would say, guys, are you nuts? Why did you bring this wine? And it sometimes wouldn't do as well as we would like it to. And that's because we didn't have the buy-in, so to speak. We didn't have the imprimatur of the sales staff and the marketing staff. So Nathan, to his great credit, so many years ago, instituted a tasting panel that we do every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how many new wines we have. We taste it around the panel, and unless the overwhelming majority agree that 2 things, number one and foremost, the wine is good and it's really excellent, and number 2, it even if it's excellent, if it's out of the park in terms of its price ratio, then we won't bring it in either. So it has to qualify under those 2 criteria for the whole group. And the group includes the sales managers, some salespeople, sometimes store owners, so that we get their point of view, sometimes restaurateurs, wine critics. We've had wine writers.
Sometimes twice a month.
Yeah. We have it. We do it.
Aggressive.
You cannot believe how many kosher wines are being made around the world. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I came back from France some months ago, from Bordeaux specifically, and I visited some really wonderful chateaus. Just to give you an example, Chateau Léoville and Las Combes. These are wineries that sell out every single bottle that they ever make, non-kosher. And yet they're making kosher cuvées, kosher runs, with our entire crew taking over the place. For us. Why? And the answer is that there's a market out there for it. People want it, and they're glad to service it.
Now, as you've admitted here on the show, you're in the business for 3.5 decades.
Yeah.
In your assessment, and you've touched on this throughout the program this evening, what fundamental changes have there been that you could just in a concise way that you could share with the audience?
The industry in general has gotten much more sophisticated. Consumers, especially here in America, have continued to demand and are getting much better product from all producers, kosher, non-kosher. And the efficiencies of going to market has become much greater. So that has all been great for both the industry and the consumer. And I think that one other, not negative, but one other kind of the other way going is that the consumption habits in the rest of in the world that was drinking a lot of wine, Italy, France, Spain, have actually declined precipitously. Meaning, just to give you a perspective, about 40 gallons per person per capita is what they drink in Europe, across Europe, Italy, Spain, France. In America, it's something like 8. Okay,
what a difference.
But what's interesting is that 5 years ago, and these are approximates.
Right,
You can
rough
look it
numbers.
up. These are just rough numbers. But 5 years ago, it might have been 5 gallons more per capita in Europe. So, which means that the entire amount of what Americans consume per capita has been lost in all of Europe. So, and the reason for that is a lot of Europe now is drinking much more cold beverages, soft drinks, beer, because in a lot of places in Europe, frankly, 20, 30 years ago, they didn't have refrigeration as much as they do now. So that's been one of the other alternate trends.
Wow.
Also, Asia has become a big consumer of wines.
Jay, the time goes so fast. What an incredible edition of Mind Your Business. What final takeaways could you share with the audience?
Don't be afraid to experiment.
Nice.
Don't be afraid to learn. And don't let anyone tell you that what you're drinking is not good. If you like it, it's good. That's your favorite wine.
77 WABC Radio presents Mind Your Business, hosted by founder and president of Bottom Line Marketing Group, Yitzchok Saftlas. Mind Your Business focuses on business and marketing strategies for success.